On the shelf of countless homes, there's an urn nobody quite knows where to put. There's no body left to bury at the cemetery. In the living room, it hurts to see it every morning. It sits there, tucked between old photographs and a candle nobody ever lights, while the family carries a question they almost never say out loud. Does a body turned to ash have the same place in heaven as one buried in blessed ground in a cemetery with a name on the stone? On August 15th, the church celebrates the one person who never left a body behind on earth. And what that day promises to cremated souls is something Saint Teresa of Jesus understood with a clarity that still surprises people today. There's something in Mary's story that no other saint shares, not even the greatest of them, not even the ones whose bodies remain incorrupt beneath an altar. She left nothing behind. No bones, no cloak, no relic anyone could reach out and touch. And Saint Teresa of Jesus, devoted to that lady since she was a little girl, understood something about that total absence that completely changes the way you look at an urn sitting in your own house. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell us if you have the ashes of someone you loved nearby, or if you never quite figured out what to do with them. Writing it down is part of what August 15 comes to heal in you. Because what follows was kept word for whoever still has that urn close by and needs to understand what that absence of a body really means and what the Queen of Heaven does with it. August 15th doesn't simply mark a death, it marks the absence of a tomb. That day, the Church celebrates the dogma of the Assumption, that Mary, at the end of her life on earth, was taken up into heaven body and soul without passing through the decay that awaits every human body. Pope Pius XIII defined it formally in 1950, though the belief had been repeated for centuries before that, held by generation after generation who never doubted something so hard to picture, an entire body, undecayed, rising into heaven. Sit with that for a moment. Any other human body, however holy the person was, goes through the same process yours and mine will. The heart stops. The burial happens. Years pass. The earth does its quiet work, the kind nobody wants to name out loud but everyone knows about anyway. With Mary, the Catholic faith has held since ancient times. Something different happened. No years waiting beneath the ground, no quiet work of decay. A complete passing. The ones who carried this faith forward generation after generation say, she, whole, with the body that walked through Nazareth and Bethlehem, with the hands that held the child in the manger, was taken into glory. Stay on that detail a second, because that's where everything this video wants to show you begins. Mary left no body waiting for the final resurrection, the way the bodies of every other saint wait beneath altars and chapels. No relics either, no physical place where pilgrims can bow before her remains. She left a tomb, yes. Tradition places it in the Kidron Valley near Gethsemane. But according to the Church's oldest memory, it was found empty. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew this teaching well. In The Way of Perfection, she speaks of Mary with a devotion that goes far beyond the ordinary piety of her time. She calls her lady. She calls her advocate. And behind those words sits a deep understanding of the Virgin as someone who lived in her own flesh the mystery every Christian hopes to live one day. The full resurrection, body and soul reunited, nothing left unfinished. A model of virtue, certainly, but that title barely scratched what she really was. Why should any of this matter if what you have at home is an urn? What could a dogma proclaimed in Rome possibly have to do with your father's ashes, your mother's, a child who left this world too soon? The answer starts to show itself here, though it isn't complete yet. If Mary is the one person who left no body at all on earth, no occupied tomb, no relic, no physical remain to venerate, then she understands, better than any other saint, what it means for a body to have no fixed place to rest. The saints whose incorrupt bodies lie beneath an altar can be visited. Their bones can be touched through glass. Their cloaks are kept in reliquaries. Mary has none of that. Her physical absence is total, complete. And whoever lived through that absence in her own flesh, whoever experienced it the only way it can be experienced, by being herself the body that was missing, carries a different kind of closeness to souls whose bodies on earth no longer occupy any recognizable space either. What we're talking about here is something more particular, more intimate than a grace handed out equally to whoever prays on August 15th. It's something Saint Teresa of Jesus understood after long meditation on the nature of the Assumption. Picture that urn from the beginning again. Picture the cemetery, where instead of a headstone with a name carved into it, there's only a small niche, or not even that. Ashes kept in a cabinet, scattered somewhere only the family remembers, or still without a resting place months after the death. The question we opened with, whether a body turned to ash holds the same place in heaven as one buried in blessed ground, starts to find its first hint of an answer right here. If a body's location on earth decided the soul's fate in heaven, Mary would hold the shakiest status of any saint. No tomb to visit, no relic to touch. And yet she is queen of heaven and earth, the closest of all creatures to God. That total absence of a physical place became, strangely enough, the highest seal on her glory. This is only the beginning of what Saint Teresa of Jesus grasped about this mystery. There's something more specific still, something she connected directly to August 15th and to souls who, like Mary, have no whole body resting beneath the ground. But to get there, we first need a piece of history almost forgotten in modern catechisms, even though it held up the faith of entire generations for centuries. It happened in Jerusalem not long after Christ's death. The apostles, already scattered across different regions, gathered around the mother in her final days. The oldest tradition speaks of a house near Mount Zion, of footsteps echoing on limestone. Then came the burial in a grotto carved into the rock of the Kidron Valley, close to the garden where Christ had prayed the night of his passion. When the community came back to that tomb sometime later, they found it empty. The memory was passed down by word of mouth with a firmness that held for 20 centuries, with no formal record ever propping it up. No ancient Christian ever debated the location of a body as venerated as Mary's, something that did happen, and intensely, with other relics from that era. The silence around her tomb became, as the centuries passed, the firmest evidence there was simply nothing left there to argue about. Dawn breaks slowly over the Kidron Valley. Light filters through the ancient olive trees of Gethsemane, and the air still holds the cool of the night as a small group approaches a grotto cut into the limestone. They are men and women who knew Mary in life, who watched her grow old with that mix of strength and tenderness only found in people who've carried too much sorrow without breaking. They come to pray at the tomb the way people did back then for any loved one who had died, carrying oils and cloths, ready to perform the rite Jewish piety required. The stone sealing the entrance is heavy. Someone pushes it aside with effort, and that rough sound of rock scraping against rock fills the small closed space of the sepulchre. They stoop to enter. The smell of damp earth, mixed with dried herbs others left before them, hangs in the air. And then in the dim light, they find something none of them expected. The place where the body should be is empty. Only the cloths remain, folded with care, as if someone had left them there on purpose before walking out. The oldest Christian tradition, handed down long before any formal definition of dogma ever existed, places this moment as the origin of a certainty that was never seriously disputed across 20 centuries of church history. Mary was taken into heaven, body and soul. The Church of Jerusalem, the oldest of them all, kept the memory of the exact spot. Today home to the Basilica of the Dormition and the nearby tomb of Mary, still visited by pilgrims from every corner of the world, but it never kept a bodily relic to show anyone. Compare that for a moment with what happened to other holy bodies from the same era. Peter's remains are venerated beneath the main altar of the basilica that bears his name in Rome. James's rest in Compostela, a destination for millions of pilgrims across the centuries. Even the lesser-known apostles left bones behind, tombs, physical places where generation after generation could kneel and feel close to someone who had already passed on. Mary has none of that. No bone, no fragment of cloth kept as a relic of her body, nothing to touch or put on display for the faithful in a glass case. Sit with the force of that contrast for a second. In an era that venerated relics deeply, that hunted for them, guarded them, carried them between entire cities like irreplaceable treasures, capable of sparking bitter disputes between communities fighting over a bone fragment or a scrap of cloth, the total absence of Mary's body caused no scandal, no suspicion among the early Christians. Nobody demanded proof. Nobody claimed a fragment. It became almost instantly an essential part of how they understood her. Her absence, so complete and so quiet, was proof enough of where she was. Think about how strange that silence really is. Any ancient Christian community would have given anything to keep a single hair of the Mother of God, a garment, a genuine bone fragment. And yet none ever had one. None ever claimed one as their own. None ever invented a fake relic to fill that gap. Something that did happen fairly often around other lesser venerated saints. That unanimous silence, held for centuries without a single crack, speaks louder than any official document ever could. Now think about the urn we mentioned at the start. Think about those ashes so many families keep without quite knowing what to do with them, with no fixed place to lay them, sometimes split between siblings who argue without wanting to, sometimes scattered somewhere only a handful of people remember precisely. Culturally, that can feel like a lack, like something essential is missing from the grieving process, something a traditional cemetery does offer, a specific spot to return to every anniversary, a headstone where you can leave fresh flowers every Sunday, a physical place where the body can at least be named with precision. Plenty of women who've carried that urn around for years without knowing where to put it down carry underneath it all a quiet guilt. As if the absence of a traditional grave left the person they loved in some lesser limbo, less dignified than the one belonging to those resting beneath a headstone with their name carved in stone. Mary's story teaches something different about what actually matters. Her glory never depended on having a recognizable physical place on earth. It depended on something else entirely, on a lifetime of fidelity given over to God, on the yes spoken in Nazareth and carried all the way to the foot of the cross, on the love that kept her at her son's side through every step of his journey without once turning away. That was the foundation of her glory, not an occupied grave. Saint Teresa of Jesus, a woman deeply rooted in the Marian tradition of Castile, spent long years of contemplative prayer meditating on this mystery. She did it, above all, from the mystical experience that shaped her entire spiritual life. She sensed that Mary's Assumption revealed something essential about how God treats those faithful to Him, beyond any external circumstance tied to the body. That insight, held and deepened over years, connects directly to what we're about to uncover about cremated souls and the specific promise of this August 15th. Because the absence of a tomb, far from diminishing Mary's glory, confirmed it in a way unique among all the saints. And from that comes a question that starts to press harder. What does it mean for a soul whose body also has no fixed resting place to have as an intercessor the one person who lived exactly that same condition? That's the question Saint Teresa of Jesus touched on in her writings without fully developing it. And it's the one this video has come to answer, unhurried, all the way through. What kind of powerful intercessor is someone who never left behind a physical place to rest on earth? The question might sound strange at first, because traditional Catholic piety was built, in large part, around very specific places: shrines, tombs, reliquaries, bones venerated for centuries on end. So how do we understand the greatest of all the saints, the very one who left no bodily trace at all? Think about Saint Teresa of Jesus herself. Her body, after her death in Alba de Tormes, remains incorrupt to this day, kept with reverence by the discalced Carmelites. Her relics, a hand, a foot, fragments of her habit, are venerated across different monasteries in Spain, and each one draws pilgrims looking to feel close to the saint through something they can touch. Thousands have traveled to those places over the centuries, convinced that touching something near the saint's body brings them closer, in some way, to her intercession. Something similar happens with Saint Francis of Assisi. His tomb in the basilica that bears his name draws millions of visitors every year, many of whom descend into the crypt just to spend a moment beside the sepulchre. With Padre Pio, more recently, the same thing plays out. His body, displayed in a glass reliquary in San Giovanni Rotondo, draws entire crowds who wait in line for hours seeking that physical closeness to something sacred. Mary breaks that pattern completely. No basilica anywhere in the world can display a genuine fragment of her body. No monastery keeps a bone of hers, a certified lock of hair, a fingernail clipping. Popular devotion has invented over the centuries countless Marian relics, veils, belts, cloaks attributed to her use. But none of them claim to be a piece of her actual body, because no such thing exists to venerate anywhere in Christendom. And yet nobody in the entire Catholic tradition doubts that Mary is the most powerful intercessor after Christ himself. Nobody questions her closeness to every soul who turns to her. Marian devotion crosses cultures, centuries, entire continents, without ever needing a physical place to anchor itself. That should make us pause for a second. If the strongest intercession in Christian history doesn't depend on a bodily relic, then the relationship between body, place, and spiritual glory runs a lot deeper than popular piety sometimes assumes without thinking it through. Saint Teresa of Jesus, in her life of deep prayer, understood this truth with rare clarity. In the book of her life, she describes mystical experiences in which the presence of the sacred made itself felt with an undeniable physical intensity, with no material object involved at all. She felt Christ present, felt the Virgin near in moments when there was no relic, no image, no sacred place to explain that closeness by ordinary reasoning. For her, spiritual nearness never once depended on the tangible. This understanding becomes especially relevant when we think about cremated souls. For generations, certain popular customs, never official church doctrine which has allowed cremation since 1963, planted the implicit idea that a soul whose body was reduced to ashes ends up in a weaker spiritual position, less protected, almost orphaned of any concrete intercession. Entire families carry this quiet worry without daring to say it out loud, afraid of sounding superstitious or overdramatic. But if we follow the reasoning we've been building, the conclusion points the opposite direction. The most powerful intercessor in Christian history is precisely the one who lived the total absence of a physical body on earth. Her glory never depended on a place to rest. Her closeness to the faithful never needed a relic to hold it up. If that's true for Mary, then the absence of a whole buried body can't, in itself, stand as an obstacle to a cremated soul's glory either. Here's where something Saint Teresa of Jesus developed in more detail in the interior castle comes in, specifically when she describes the innermost dwelling places of the soul, the ones where the deepest union with God takes place, what she called spiritual marriage. She wrote that the soul, in its most intimate relationship with the divine, completely transcends any external bodily condition, any physical circumstance surrounding it. What matters, she insisted again and again throughout her writing, is the soul's interior state before God, not the physical circumstances of its departure from this world, nor the place where its body ended up. Applied to cremated souls, this teaching offers real, grounded comfort, not a sentimental afterthought meant to soothe grieving families. The state of the body after death, buried whole, cremated, scattered, even lost in tragic circumstances, doesn't determine the soul's fate before God. Catholic tradition always held this firmly, even before cremation became common practice in the Western world. Think, for example, of the martyrs of the earliest centuries, whose bodies were often deliberately burned by their persecutors, precisely to keep Christians from venerating them as relics. The Church never taught that those martyrs lost their glory because of how their bodies ended up. Quite the opposite. She honored them as the first saints on the Christian calendar, with no need for a whole body to display. And Mary, the only saint with no earthly body to venerate, stands as the clearest living proof of that same truth, taken to its fullest and most definitive form. Something more specific is still missing, though, because understanding that the absence of a body isn't an obstacle still doesn't answer the central question this video opened with. What exactly Our Lady of the Assumption promises, this August 15th, to cremated souls specifically? That concrete promise, the one Saint Teresa of Jesus tied directly to this feast, starts to come into focus in what follows. Avila, the middle of the 16th century. An ordinary afternoon inside the convent of the Incarnation, Saint Teresa of Jesus sits writing at a small table, light slanting in through a narrow window, the distant sound of the sisters praying in the choir filtering through the thick stone walls. Years into the contemplative life by now, she's built a relationship with the Virgin that goes far beyond the ordinary devotion of her time. She calls her Lady, she calls her Advocate, and in The Way of Perfection, written to instruct her Carmelite sisters in the foundations of prayer, she gives whole pages over to explaining why this relationship with Mary sits at the very center of any serious spiritual life, not just for the nuns in her convent, but for any believer trying to draw close to God in real depth. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood Mary as an active, close presence, capable of interceding in a concrete and personal way in the life of every soul who turned to her sincerely, a world away from prayers repeated out of habit with no real understanding behind them. This understanding grew out of her own mystical experience, documented at length in the book of her life, where she describes moments of prayer in which she felt the nearness of the sacred with an intensity that went beyond any conventional, rational explanation. There's a biographical detail that lights up this bond especially well. When Saint Teresa of Jesus lost her mother as a young girl, she went, as she herself recounts in the book of her life, to an image of the Virgin in the convent where she was being educated and asked her to be her mother from that point on. It was a gesture that shaped the rest of her spiritual life. Nothing close to a passing pious anecdote. From that moment, Mary held a real maternal place in how she understood the faith, not a merely symbolic one. This filial relationship explains, in large part, why Saint Teresa of Jesus paid such close attention to the mystery of the Assumption throughout her life of prayer. For her, understanding what happened to Mary at the end of her earthly life was, above all, a way of understanding the spiritual mother she had chosen since childhood, far more than an abstract theological exercise. She meditated on it with the same intensity she brought to meditating on the Passion of Christ, or on the soul's deepest dwelling places. An intuition worth paying close attention to shows up in her writing. The certainty that Mary, precisely because she lived in her own flesh, the full passing into glory, with nothing left unfinished on earth, understands in a unique way the pain of anyone who feels something was left incomplete in saying goodbye to someone they loved. That weight you can't always put into words, but that returns every time you remember the day of the funeral. It's a reading consistent with Saint Teresa of Jesus' constant insistence that the intercession of the saints grows out of real human experience, not out of some distant abstract holiness, and it's a fair reading, not a strained interpretation stretched out of her words. Think now of families who, after cremating someone they loved, feel something was left unresolved. That sense of incompleteness is real and common. There was no traditional burial, no headstone to carve a name into, and sometimes not even a clear moment of closure, especially when the ashes sit at home for months or years before the family decides what to do with them. That unfinished feeling can weigh on the heart for years after the death, resurfacing on certain dates, on anniversaries, on those quiet evenings when someone looks at the urn and wonders if they did the right thing. There's something particularly painful, hard to put into words, in that uncertainty. Unlike a grave with a headstone, which offers a clear ritual, bringing flowers, lighting a candle, standing in prayer before a specific spot, an urn at home doesn't always come with a defined spiritual protocol. Many families improvise, searching on their own for some gesture that feels right. Without any real certainty, they're doing what their faith calls for. That quiet, persistent uncertainty is exactly the kind of deep wound Saint Teresa's understanding of Mary can start to heal, little by little. Mary, according to the intuition Saint Teresa of Jesus developed across her whole contemplative life, understands that sense of unfinished business better than any other saint in the Church. She herself lived in her own body something similar. A passing with no visible earthly ceremony, no witnesses documenting the exact moment in detail, no tomb where the body remained for others to say a slow, calm goodbye in front of. And yet that ceremonieless passing ended in the fullest, most complete glory a human being can ever reach. That shared experience is exactly what makes her the ideal intercessor for cremated souls. Something far more personal than a generic grace handed out equally to every believer on August 15th. It's the understanding of someone who lived in her own flesh, the absence of a traditional physical closure, and who still reached the absolute fullness of glory. The exact shape of that promise still needs pinning down. Saint Teresa of Jesus never wrote out a closed formula on this specific point, but her understanding of the Assumption, joined to her filial devotion to Mary and her constant insistence that God always acts in a personal way with each soul, never a generic one, points clearly toward what this August 15th really means for anyone carrying an urn at home without quite knowing what to do with it. That clarity, though, still needs one final step to become fully concrete, and that step is exactly what comes next. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the urn again. The cold metal, or maybe polished wood, sitting on a quiet shelf, next to a framed photograph and perhaps a rosary nobody uses anymore. Inside it, what's left of an entire life. Hands that worked the land or cooked 1,000 meals. A face that smiled 1,000 times in that same kitchen. A voice that said your name with a tenderness you can still recall with exact precision, even years later. That person is there, reduced to a handful of gray ash, and you look at it every morning as you pass by, quietly wondering whether heaven treats it with the same dignity it would give a whole body resting beneath blessed ground. Here is the promise Saint Teresa of Jesus understood deeply, and that August 15th, the Church celebrates without always explaining it with the clarity it truly deserves. Mary, the Queen just assumed into heaven body and soul, holds out to cremated souls a particular kind of recognition, different from what any other soul resting beneath a headstone receives. And that closeness comes from something very concrete. She, better than any other saint in heaven, knows exactly what it means to leave no body at all behind on earth. Think about what happens when someone goes through an experience nobody else fully understands. We instinctively look for someone who's lived something similar. A father who lost a young child finds real comfort in another father who went through the same thing, not in someone who only imagines it from the outside, however good their intentions, without any real knowledge of that specific wound. A newly widowed woman sits with more confidence beside another widow than beside someone who never buried a husband with her own hands, no matter how sincere that person's affection might be. That's how real human comfort works. And that's also how, in Saint Teresa of Jesus' understanding, the intercession of the saints works. It grows out of shared experience, not abstract sympathy. In the same way, a soul whose body ended up as ashes finds in Mary an understanding no other saint, however holy, can offer with that same exact closeness. She too lived the total absence of a recognizable earthly body. Peter, Paul, Francis, every great saint of the Church left behind a body their followers could bury with honor, venerate for generations, travel to visit for centuries. Only Mary lived the opposite, a passing with no body left behind at all. And that difference, small as it might look from the outside, enormous from the standpoint of faith, makes her the only one able to fully grasp what it means to have no physical place where the body remains whole for the world to see. That closeness grows out of the very logic of the communion of saints, that real bond the Church has always held between those already enjoying God and those still on their way to Him, far from some pious theory invented just to console families with pretty words. The saints intercede precisely out of their own lived human experience, out of what they carried in their own flesh, out of the concrete wounds they bore while they were in this world. Saint Monica intercedes especially for mothers weeping over children who've drifted from the faith, because she wept that same way for years on end. Saint Joseph intercedes for those facing a quiet death with little witness, because that was his own passing too. And none of them lived in their own body what Mary lived on the day of her passing. A complete departure, leaving no body behind at all, no occupied tomb for future generations to visit. Saint Teresa of Jesus, in her deep understanding of Marian intercession, knew that the Virgin always acts personally, never generically, drawing near to each soul according to its specific need, its own particular story, what that specific soul requires to reach lasting peace. Far from handing out one uniform grace to every believer alike, the way someone might distribute an identical gift with no distinction at all. And cremated souls, precisely because of the nature of their passing, carry a need Mary understands, with a precision no other intercessor holds in the same way. This August 15th, while the whole Church celebrates the Assumption, something happens in a special way in heaven for those particular souls. The Queen who rose without leaving an earthly body draws especially close to those who also left no whole body resting beneath the ground. There's no need to picture grand ceremonies or dramatic scenes to understand this. It's enough to grasp that the spiritual closeness between Mary and those souls grows out of a shared, real, verifiable condition in the faith's own history. Both experienced, to some degree, the total absence of a physical place where the body stayed intact for the world. For someone with an urn at home, this understanding completely changes the way daily grief feels. There's no longer any need to ask, in that anguish that shows up at night, whether the loved one ended up at some spiritual disadvantage for lacking a traditional grave. Because there is, in heaven, an intercessor who understands exactly that circumstance. She lived it herself in her own body, the only way a human being ever could, being taken up into heaven with no bodily trace left on earth. Saint Teresa of Jesus, a devoted follower of the Virgin since childhood in Avila, would have recognized in this truth a real deep reason for hope for any family, today carrying an urn without quite knowing what to do with it. An unexpected closeness with the Queen of Heaven, who understands like no one else what it means to leave this world without a whole body for others to visit, and no trace of spiritual abandonment in that absence of a grave. The creed recited every Sunday at Mass holds a line most of the faithful say almost from memory, without pausing to consider its real weight. I believe in the resurrection of the body. That article of faith, spelled out since the earliest centuries of Christianity and defended firmly against those who denied it back then, holds something deeply concrete. At the end of time, God will return to every person, their body, glorified and perfect, reunited with the soul for eternal life, with no exceptions among the faithful who persevered to the end. This article of the Creed treats every kind of bodily fate the same, with no hierarchy at all between a buried body, a cremated one, a body lost at sea, a body destroyed in a fire, or the body of a martyr burned at the stake for the faith. For God, who made the entire universe out of absolute nothing, gathering the scattered elements of a human body, wherever they are, whatever state they're in, poses no difficulty at all. The Catechism of the Catholic Church puts it plainly. The resurrection of the body means that after death, God, in His infinite power, will return final life to the transformed body of each person, joining it once again to the soul forever. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew this teaching well and developed it in depth in the interior castle, particularly when she describes the state of the soul in the final dwelling places, where a glimpse of future glory already appears. She speaks there of a body that, fully transformed, will share completely in the glory the soul already enjoys in union with God, with the clarity, lightness, and radiance mystical tradition always attributes to the glorified body. It's a firm theological conviction, not a pretty poetic image with no doctrinal backing, held up by centuries of church tradition and confirmed in today's catechism. It's worth pausing on how Saint Teresa of Jesus described that future transformation of the body. In her writing, the resurrected flesh always appears free of everything that limits it in this present life: the exhaustion, the sickness, the very weight of matter itself. It's an entirely new reality, sharing in the same glory that already surrounds the soul in its union with God. Nowhere close to being a simple upgraded version of the earthly body, a sturdier copy of the same thing. Here's something worth stopping on for families who feel uneasy about a loved one's cremation. The Catholic Church has allowed cremation since 1963, when the Vatican published the instruction Piam et constantem, provided it isn't chosen as a way of denying belief in the resurrection. Before that date, the ban existed precisely because, in certain historical contexts, especially in circles that openly denied the resurrection of the body, or that used cremation as an ideological rejection of the Christian faith, the act carried a meaning at odds with Christian hope. But once it's clear the choice, in most cases today, comes down to practical reasons, space, family custom, and not a rejection of the faith, the Church recognizes without hesitation that the ashes of a faithful Christian await the resurrection exactly the same way a body buried whole beneath a named headstone does. Think about what this really means for a family quietly carrying that worry. The physical state of the ashes today, kept in an urn, scattered somewhere meaningful, even split between relatives living far apart from one another, has no bearing at all on the promise of the final resurrection. God doesn't need the body to stay intact in order to rebuild it. The same divine power that created the universe out of nothing can obviously gather any scattered element, no matter its current form or location. And this is where Mary's assumption takes on particular weight for cremated souls across the Catholic world. She is, according to firmly held Catholic doctrine since ancient times, the only person besides Christ already living the complete resurrection of body and soul. She lives it already, right now, in total fullness, with no reservation at all, without waiting for the final moment of the universal resurrection, the way every other saint does. That's why, when the whole Church celebrates her on August 15th, it's really celebrating an early, very concrete guarantee. What happened to her, the first and only one to experience it fully this way, stands as living, certain proof that the promise holds for everyone, no matter the state of their earthly body. For a cremated soul, that guarantee takes on especially comforting meaning. There's no need to wonder whether scattered ashes somehow complicate God's plan for that person. Mary, living proof of resurrection ahead of time, shows that the road to complete glory depends on the faithfulness of a life lived and on God's infinite mercy, capable of putting back together anything scattered, however small it looks to human eyes, and not on how the body remains on earth. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this truth with a depth that goes well beyond textbook theology. For her, every Marian mystery was, above all, an invitation to trust deeply in God's power over any physical circumstance, however hard or incomplete it might look from a limited human vantage point. The same limited vantage point that sometimes makes an urn on a shelf look less dignified than a grave with a name carved into stone. And that trust is exactly what this August 15 comes to offer anyone still carrying, in their heart, the quiet question about the final destiny of ashes kept at home, without quite knowing what to do with them or who to entrust them to. Take a moment today to do something concrete for the soul whose urn you keep at home. Above all, you need a willing heart and a few real minutes, set apart from the rush of the day and given fully to this intention. More than any elaborate ritual or special theological knowledge, start by physically approaching the urn, if you keep it nearby, or by bringing that person's face clearly to mind. If the ashes are somewhere else, or you no longer have them at all, settle somewhere quiet, away from the television or the phone that keeps demanding your attention. Light a candle if you have one on hand. That simple gesture, the flame, carries deep symbolic weight in Catholic tradition, standing for prayer rising toward God without interruption as it burns, a small bridge between the visible and the invisible. If you don't have a candle for any reason, deep silence and full intention are enough. No extra object is needed for the prayer to arrive just as strong. Then pray slowly a full Hail Mary, thinking consciously of the Virgin's Assumption as you say each word, without rushing, letting every phrase settle in the heart before moving to the next. When you reach the line, "Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death," pause for a moment and offer that plea specifically for the soul whose body ended up as ashes. Ask Mary, the one who rose into heaven with no earthly body left behind, to recognize that soul personally, a soul that also has no fixed place of rest on earth, by the same name you called them in life, with the same gestures of affection you remember from them. You can repeat this prayer as many times as feels right, with no rush at all and no watching the clock. Some people find comfort praying a full rosary dedicated entirely to this intention, meditating on each mystery with the certainty that Mary listens with the same personal attention she gave every saint who already keeps her company in heaven. Others prefer the simplicity of one short prayer, said slowly and with the whole soul behind it, with no need for long formulas or elaborate words. Both are equally valid before God. What God looks at, as Saint Teresa of Jesus taught constantly throughout her religious life, is the disposition of the heart, not the length of the prayer. After that prayer, consider going a step further, formally entrusting that soul to the Virgin's special protection, with a gesture you can repeat every year on this same date, turning it into a tradition of your own. You might say, in your own words, something like this: Our Lady of the Assumption, Queen who rose to heaven body and soul with no tomb left on earth, I entrust to you today the soul of my loved one, whose body also ended up with no fixed place of rest. Recognize this soul as your own, draw it near to your glory, and grant it the peace you already share with your Son. You can say it out loud or in silence, kneeling or seated, whatever your body and circumstances allow. What matters is the sincerity of the intention and the trust placed in Mary's intercession, not the exact form the words take. In her teaching on prayer in the way of perfection, Saint Teresa of Jesus insisted that God values the quality of attention given to prayer far more than the number of words spoken. A single Hail Mary said with real attention and love, she taught, carries more spiritual weight than many prayers repeated mechanically, with no real awareness of what's being said, distracted by 1,000 thoughts drifting in and out with no control. The same teaching applies here. What counts today is the sincerity you bring to it, far more than how long the ritual runs. If you're able to, consider also going to Mass this August 15th, offering the intention specifically for that cremated soul at the start of the celebration or during the prayers of the faithful. The Eucharist is, according to the whole Catholic tradition, the most powerful offering that exists for the dead, far above any private prayer, however beautiful it might be. If you can't attend in person because of health, distance, or any other circumstance, offer a spiritual communion from wherever you are, joining your intention to a Mass being celebrated somewhere in the world at that very moment, trusting that spiritual union reaches God just the same. Consider, too, a very simple but meaningful gesture. If the ashes still have no permanent destination, dedicate this August 15th to making a decision about it, even a small one. It could mean finally choosing a final resting place, talking with a priest about the options appropriate under Catholic teaching, or simply deciding as a family on a symbolic gesture of farewell that's been left undone for a long time. The Church recommends that ashes rest in a sacred place, a cemetery or a blessed columbarium, and this feast of the Assumption is an especially fitting day to take that pending step so many families put off year after year, unsure where to even begin. This August 15th, then, doesn't have to pass like just another day on the calendar, one more among so many that come and go without leaving a trace. It can become the exact moment that soul, whose body ended up as ashes, receives the personal recognition of the Queen who understands, better than anyone in heaven, what it means to leave no whole body on earth. The same Queen who on this very day, nearly 2,000 years ago, lived that exact condition herself before rising in glory alongside her Son. What if my loved one is at some spiritual disadvantage for not having a traditional grave? That question, worded this way or 1,000 similar ways, has run through this whole video from the first second, hidden inside the quiet urn we described at the start, in the deep silence of someone who looks at it every morning and never dares say out loud what they actually fear. That worry that shows up right before sleep, one that often nobody else in the family fully shares. Now, after everything we've covered in this video, the empty tomb at Josaphat, the total absence of Marian relics, Saint Teresa of Jesus' filial devotion, the concrete promise of this August 15th, and the Creed's firm teaching on the resurrection of the body, there's a clear, definitive answer to give. How can someone with no body understand a body reduced to ashes? Someone more skeptical might ask. Someone who needs solid, concrete reasons rather than easy sentiment or comfort. The answer sits in Mary's own story, the way we rebuilt it step by step throughout this video. Precisely because she left no body at all on earth, no occupied tomb to visit, no relic any church could ever put on display for the faithful, she understands that absence with a precision no other saint holds. What it takes really is having lived that exact absence of a body yourself. You don't need an intact body to understand the lack of one. And among all the saints in heaven, only Mary lived that in her own flesh, in the fullest, most complete way possible. So does my cremated loved one have some special advantage this August 15th? It's less about an advantage over other souls. Heaven has no unfair privileges, no arbitrary favoritism between one soul and another, and more about a particular personal recognition aimed specifically at those who share with Mary that same condition of having no whole body resting on earth. The Queen who rose to heaven with no grave left behind draws close on this particular day to those who don't have one either, with the same close maternal tenderness she showed Saint Teresa of Jesus when she chose her as a mother while still an orphaned little girl in Avila. Go back one more time to the urn we started with, the one sitting on a quiet shelf we described at the beginning of this video. Don't look at it anymore as a symbol of something incomplete, a farewell process left half-finished because there was no traditional burial, because you never got to bring fresh flowers every Sunday to a headstone with a name carved into it. Look at it instead as the place from which a unique intercessor, the only one among all the saints in heaven who lived that exact same lack of an earthly body, extends her closest, most personal presence, the most intimate one there is in all of heaven. The absence of a grave you felt as a deep lack, as a hard-to-name emptiness, reveals itself in light of everything this video has covered as the exact point of connection with the Queen of Heaven, the precise place where her understanding runs closer than any other saint's. If Saint Teresa of Jesus could speak to you directly about this today, she would probably tell you to set down the quiet guilt of not having held a traditional burial, to stop asking yourself if you failed somehow by choosing cremation, that nagging doubt that keeps coming back, especially on certain dates, and to trust instead in the deep logic of the Catholic faith. The state of the body never determined and never will determine the state of the soul before God. She herself, in her life of contemplative prayer within the walls of Carmel, learned to draw a clear line between what troubles the senses and what truly matters to the soul in God's eyes. And that same distinction, so simple to name and so hard to live through in the middle of grief, is what she offers you today through this video as a concrete, personal gift for your mourning. This August 15th, while the whole church celebrates the Assumption with bells, flowers, and processions in towns and cities across the Catholic world, that truth becomes especially real for anyone who, like you, keeps an urn without quite knowing what to do with it. The loop we opened at the start of this video, the question of whether a body turned to ash holds the same place in heaven as one buried in blessed ground, finds its final answer right here. Yes, exactly the same place, with an added closeness only cremated souls share with the Mother of God herself. Heaven doesn't rank souls by the shape of the body left on earth. Instead, it offers a personal recognition that becomes especially present this August 15th for those living this particular circumstance, one no other feast on the Catholic liturgical calendar offers with this same specific personal closeness. Hold this truth with you quietly the next time you look at that urn tomorrow, and the day after, and on every anniversary that comes, and on every date that used to feel especially painful. It's now, you know, a special meeting point with the Queen who understands, better than anyone in heaven, what it means to leave this world without a whole body left on earth. No longer a place of spiritual uncertainty, the way it might have felt before hearing all this, because she herself lived exactly that. And from that same experience, this August 15th, she reaches her hand toward the soul you loved so much, toward that person whose face you can still see with perfect clarity every time you close your eyes and let the memory speak without hurrying. You made it this far, carrying a question you may have never dared say out loud to anyone, not even the people closest to you in your own family. And now you carry it differently. You know now that Mary, the only one among all the saints who left no body at all on earth, understands with a closeness no other intercessor holds what it means to have an urn with no fixed place, ashes still waiting for a destination, a grief that felt incomplete for lacking a traditional burial. You know now that the empty tomb in the Kidron Valley, held up by the Church's memory for 20 full centuries with no need for any relic to confirm it, is the first testimony of that unique condition she shares today with cremated souls across the Catholic world. You know now that Saint Teresa of Jesus, a devoted daughter of that same lady since she was an orphaned little girl in Avila, understood this truth with a depth textbook theology rarely reaches, an understanding born of years and years of contemplative prayer, and above all, you now know something that might change, from today on, the way you look at that urn on the shelf, the one you've been looking at with a mix of love and quiet doubt. The state of the body never determined, and never will determine, the soul's fate before God. The Creed states this with total clarity. Catholic tradition confirms it going back to the first martyrs, and Mary's own assumption proves it in the fullest way possible. This August 15, while the whole church celebrates the Queen who rose to heaven with no grave left behind, that same Queen draws near in a special and personal way to those who, like your loved one, also left no whole body resting beneath the ground. If you did the gesture we suggested a moment ago, that unhurried prayer, that consecration said in your own words, that candle lit in front of the urn, something moved in heaven today for the soul you loved so much. All it took was a willing heart and a few minutes stolen from the rush of the day, nothing close to an elaborate ritual. And before God, that's more than enough. Keep this certainty with you as a quiet companion for the next times you look at that urn and feel, once again, the pull of doubt, not as just another fact that fades with the passing months. There's something I want to ask of you before you carry on with your day. Something small that might mean more than it seems at first. Think for a moment about how many times you've heard stories about saints and miracles that stuck with you without you quite knowing why. Some of those stories you heard as a child, from a grandmother telling them while she cooked, or in a Sunday catechism class that bored you back then, but that you now remember fondly. Others you discovered as an adult, in a moment of need, when life pushed you to look for answers you hadn't thought to look for before, when the death of someone close forced you to ask questions you'd rather have kept from looking at directly. Each of those stories left a different mark, and none of them landed in your life by accident. Faith is passed down that way, generation after generation, story after story, from someone who shares it to someone who receives it with an open, willing heart. And right now, as you finish hearing these words, another story is waiting for you. Another revelation about Saint Teresa of Jesus and her deep understanding of the mysteries of the Catholic faith. One that might touch exactly the nerve you need touched today. The one you didn't even know you needed touched until this very moment. Think of the person you love who has already left this world. Think of how many questions you still carry about their eternal fate, about how to help them better through prayer, about what other mysteries of the faith might bring you peace in those moments when the grief comes back without warning. Those nights when the memory grows heavier than usual and you need something solid to hold on to, some concrete truth to grab onto when everything else feels uncertain. Those questions don't get answered in a single video, or a single day of reflection, or even a full year of steady searching. Understanding life after death, the intercession of the saints, the specific graces each liturgical feast offers throughout the year, it's a long and beautiful road, and every step you take on it brings you a little closer to the peace you've been looking for. That peace that sometimes feels far away, but never actually stops being within reach of anyone who searches for it sincerely. Right now, on the screen in front of you, another story is ready to begin, maybe already visible this very instant as you finish hearing these words. Another revelation about Saint Teresa of Jesus, another feast on the Catholic calendar explained with the same depth and the same care as this one. Maybe it's about another saint who also understood, in their own life, the pain of grief and absence. Maybe it's about a form of prayer you don't know yet, one that could become, starting today, part of your daily spiritual life. Something as simple as lighting a candle, or as deep as a full consecration. Maybe it finally answers that question you've carried for years and never found anyone to explain calmly, unhurried, with the respect a subject as delicate as the death of someone you loved deeply deserves. Listen to that story, because every new understanding of the Catholic faith is, at bottom, an act of love toward those who've already left this world, and toward yourself, still here, carrying their memory with all the tenderness it deserves. Every video you watch with this intention becomes, almost without you noticing, another form of prayer, an act of faithfulness to that person, no longer physically with you but still present in every gesture of love you offer them. Let yourself be carried then toward that next story. Let this moment of quiet reflection you've already started today continue. This space of silence and thought you so rarely allow yourself in the middle of daily obligations, between work, family, and the 1,000 tasks that fill every day without leaving room for what truly matters. Faith is fed by steadiness, by small steps repeated faithfully, not by isolated moments that fade the second they end, lost among all the other things filling the mind. And every new truth you discover about Saint Teresa of Jesus, about the Virgin, about the deep mysteries of eternal life, becomes one more stone laid toward building a firmer relationship with God and with those already living beside Him, waiting for the day you join them in glory too. That final reunion every believing heart carries as hope etched in. Your loved one, that cremated soul you entrusted to Our Lady of the Assumption today, is grateful for every moment you spend growing in faith, even though you'll never see or hear it with the ears of the body. Because every time you draw closer to God, the chance that your prayer reaches them grows too. Stronger, clearer, more spiritually effective, like an invisible chain linking your heart to theirs across time and distance. So keep walking this path you already started today with such sincerity. The next story is waiting for you right there, one tap away. Before I say goodbye, I want to leave you with something Saint Teresa of Jesus repeated often in her writing, especially in moments of hardship or uncertainty. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you, for whoever has God lacks nothing. That trust, simple and deep at once, held by centuries of the faithful who repeated it through their darkest hours, is the same trust I invite you to carry with you today when you look again at that urn, that photograph, that place where you keep the memory of someone you loved so much. Mary, the Queen who rose to heaven with no body left on earth, walks closer to you today than you might have imagined when you started watching this video. And she walks, above all, even closer still to that soul you entrusted to her, with a maternal tenderness only someone who lived that exact same absence of an earthly body can offer with that much understanding and closeness. Rest today in that certainty. There's nothing more you need to do right now. No rush pushing you, no clock running against you in these minutes of quiet reflection. Just the peace of knowing that this August 15th, while the world carries on with its usual noise and hurry, something truly beautiful happened for that person you carry in your heart. They were recognized, personally and uniquely, by the Queen of Heaven. May Our Lady of the Assumption walk with you through every day ahead. May she hold you up in the moments when the memory weighs heavier than usual, especially on the dates that used to be hardest to get through. And may she always remind you that the love you feel today for someone who has already passed is, in itself, a form of prayer that never fails to reach heaven, however quiet and simple it may seem from down here. May God bless you always, you and your whole family, through every day you still have left to live on this earth. And may you rest, today and always, in the deep peace only true faith can give.